Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Cradle News Roundup, your one-stop shop for all news West Asia. My name is Esteban Carrillo. I'm the news editor for the Cradle, and as usual, I'm joined by my colleagues, content creator and writer for the Cradle, Karim Shami, and columnist and editor for the Cradle, Sharmin Narwani. Before we start, as usual, we just want to remind you to please to subscribe to our channel, to leave a like in this video, to share, and to find us on Patreon, where you can become a direct supporter of the Cradle and help us continue to do the work that we do here. So today, as usual, many things to go over, but let's quickly start with an update on the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, this coalition of activists that kind of captured the world's attention over the past couple of weeks on their way to break the Israeli siege. Overnight, before a few hours before we started this recording, they were detained by Israeli forces in international waters. Their ship was seized. They are currently jailed or, in detention, according to Israeli media. The plan is to jail them individually and to be, the Israeli defense minister announces plans to show them the videos of the atrocities that Hamas committed. So I imagine a clockwork orange situation is currently happening probably with these activists being shown these videos, right, that nobody in the media has actually seen. In any case, I want to hear you guys' comments mainly on what's next. It's more likely than not that these activists are going to get deported. Um, the as the Israeli media was calling them, right, the selfie yacht. This is how they refer to the flotilla. And also, is this opening the doors for more action, for more of this type of civilian in a way action of trying to break the siege? We know that currently there is a convoy heading from Tunisia that is also looking to break the siege of Gaza, kind of like as a desperate move as the Freedom Flotilla was, due to the inaction of the quote unquote civilized world, or just really any other nation, besides Yemen, that has actively been trying to stop what's happening in Gaza. Give us your thoughts, guys.
So first, what happened is that they detained them in international water. They didn't even reach Gaza shorelines or Israeli
They
shorelines.
were in international
And
waters, right?
yeah, they were international water. And what got my attention is that we didn't see any, we didn't see condemnation from the rest of the world of what happened, although they were detained and they were in international water. And imagine this happened the other way around. Imagine Iran detained. Even a hostile ship in the Persian Gulf, everybody will go to the media and many people will comment about this. But because it's
Maybe in a positive way. Do you remember that amazing photo of Iranian Navy apprehending U.S. naval forces or Navy social? No, Navy what? Sailors. And they were on their knees with their hands behind their heads. I mean, I kind of think
I
everyone
know,
liked that.
but this was long ago, Sharmeen. Unfortunately, they didn't do it again.
Well, the Americans didn't go near Iranian
Yeah,
waters
maybe
after
also,
that.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, so I think, as you said, Esteban, I didn't see that this flotilla like made any significant improvements for the suffering of the Gazans. But as you said, this will encourage others to do the same, as we heard about the Tunisian ships.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I partly didn't see the point of it at all. It was 12 activists, um, granted, chosen from mostly Western nationalities who boarded what amounted to not much more than a shipping vessel, sorry, a fishing vessel, um, who were obviously the Israelis were not going to do like a 2010 Mavi Marmara repeat. They wouldn't need to. They just need to like bump up against the little boat and walk on. And it's so annoying. The Israeli footage released has, IDF soldiers handing the activists food and water, and the activists taking it, like, at least say no, you know. I'm not gonna criticize anything these guys, the activists did. They made a valiant effort to shine a light on what was happening in Gaza where other people aren't. And that's something that can be said for them, that they bother to do something about Gaza where other countries and other nationals are not. On the other hand, as Kenny mentioned, maybe the only way this would have an upside is if it emboldened others to do the same. But, not another fishing boat. It should be 60 or 80 boats. I mean, that's the thing. It's sort of like the Iranian speedboat theory for their navy. If you get enough boats, you're going to confuse the enemy for sure. Okay, so that would be a good thing. Otherwise, I mean, I feel bad. These guys weathered the seas for I feel nothing.
Almost 2 weeks, right? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Nothing in the terms of of a practical sense, but the message that is being sent is this is literally the only group of people actively doing something, right? In the sense of taking this boat, and we know that the Freedom Flotilla they've been trying to do this for a while now. And the last time they were almost sunk by an Israeli drone. I imagine they weren't shot this time because of the high profile of the activists aboard. This is why you get the videos, of the food and the water and the sandwiches, and they're probably not going to be in Israeli detention for long. One would imagine, right? Because there's also like a European member of parliament among those on board. The condemnations were quick to come from a number of countries, from Turkey, from Spain, from Iran. Um, yeah, again, you would imagine that some of the countries where these people are from should also, start pressuring Israel to release them. But in any case, we will know what's going to happen later on.
Israel's going to release them really quickly. I mean, for them, they managed to snuff this out with minimal effort, and the longer they keep them, the worse it is for Israel. So I suspect these people will be released very quickly.
So the message, right? The message that is sent by this tiny ship trying to break a siege that has been ongoing for more than since the start of the genocide. I mean, Gaza has been under a naval blockade since 2007, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong. So this is a bigger problem, right? But another bigger problem is what's happening with Israel in international courts. We are seeing more and more efforts to bring Israeli leaders to justice, and not just in court. Well, yes, in courts, because one of the biggest stories that we had last week was a court in Canada ruling against the Jewish National Fund as a charitable organization. Now, this organization, based in Canada, has been funding the construction of settlements in the occupied West Bank, and also funding the construction, I think, of military outposts. There was donations directly to the Israeli military, which is prohibited under Canadian charitable law. So the Canadian Revenue
And
Agency.
planting forests over depopulated Palestinian villages.
Exactly, greenwashing the occupation, the displacement of Palestinians. So on Friday, a Canadian appeals court finally rejects this, essentially forces the JNF to dismantle. And this is a very big development, right, in terms of the perception of what is happening within the occupied Palestinian territories. And at the same time, you have other examples. You have this French grandmother who last week files homicide cases against Israeli authorities and Israeli officials for the murder of her two grandchildren in Gaza in late October 2023. They were killed by an airstrike in their home. A missile literally shot into their window. The kids aged 6 and 9, if I'm correct. So then on top of that, you have, something we've already covered several times here at the Cradle, and, we even have an interview with the director of the Hindra J Foundation, this Brussels-based NGO that has been targeting individual Israeli soldiers in national courts. The most recent case in Peru, where a criminal complaint is actually open against, these soldiers. Other criminal complaints open in Thailand. Remember what happened in Brazil a few months ago, where the soldiers had literally to be smuggled out of the country so that they could escape a prosecution or just an investigation, right? Because we're not even talking about prosecution yet. These are just open investigations. So it seems, that all of this is really starting to amount to something, right? And that's something probably being the fact that you cannot ignore what's been happening in Gaza and in the West Bank for the past not just 19 months, not just since October 2023, for even before. So what do you guys think? I especially want to hear from you, Charmin, about all of these, the courts and the way they're acting.
Well, as y'all know, I've been bleating on about this for almost 2 years now that, when people think Israel's made some strides or Israel's landed some victories, I've always cautioned against that kind of thinking because I've said the lawfare um, flood hasn't even started yet. The ICJ case against Israel's genocide in Gaza and the ICC's cases against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. I have been saying that these will have a freezing effect, not just on multinational major corporations doing business in Israel, but also the ability of countries, Israeli allies, to send weapons to Israel during the war, period. I mean, they can say, oh, it's not being used in Gaza, as the British try to do, and the governments are saying, but this isn't for weapons used in Gaza, this is for parts, for whatever. I'm just saying there's going to be a freezing effect across all companies, arms manufactured, even governments, sending anything military to Israel in case there's some fungibility issues or just arming a genocidal state, right? And then, of course, this is going to be triggered by any single civil lawsuit brought in any major jurisdiction in the world that is won. Um, uh, that is won in the courts, because once someone has won something like this, there's a precedent. And as you mentioned, Hindra J has launched at least 100 lawsuits around the world, civil suits defending individual defendants. I mean, the French case is very interesting because the grandmother, whose name is Jacqueline Rivaux, is a French national, and they believe that this will give French courts direct jurisdiction to examine the genocide accusation. Jurisdiction is always really important, and Israeli, American, Western lawyers aligned with Israel will always try to use the slimmest loopholes to try to get a court case tossed out of court, right? So jurisdiction is very important to establish. Once you do, it can just, tear open the gateways for similar suits. In this case, Jacqueline Rivaux, I believe her two grandchildren in Gaza also had dual nationality. They were moved to an area of safety in Gaza, and then the house was hit by two F-16 U.S. missiles, one through the roof and the other directly into the bedroom where the kids were staying. So she's also not just going after Israel, this Jacqueline from France, but filing suit against individuals, including Israeli individuals, including the Israeli prime minister, members of his government, and members of the Israeli army. Any suit like this one can change everything on the lawfare scene. And this is going to happen because this is just Hindra J filing 100 lawsuits. There are others filing lawsuits around the world. You just need one to stick in the right kind of court, in the right kind of jurisdiction. And I think it's game over for Israel. Now, Israel will, of course, not be able to focus all its attention on hundreds of lawsuits around the world. It will focus its attention on the ICJ and ICC hearings underway, because to undo it at the international law level, at the highest court in the world, it believes will have ramifications throughout others. So if they get the ICJ hearing kicked out because of jurisdiction, which is what the Israelis have rushed back to do now, and it just stops the court case, then people can't so easily link genocide in Israel. Or that's what they will try to do. But I mean, it's kind of like, sticking fingers in a dam, that is very old and foundationally shaky. You stick your fingers in a hole that's leaking and 5 others open up. And I think that's what Israel is going to be dealing with on a lawfare level for the foreseeable future until it collapses.
But then you also need to consider actions such as the sanctions on ICC judges, right? The US just last week sanctions 4 ICC judges. They already sanctioned Karim Khan, the lead prosecutor at the ICC, and now they're targeting
And
other
they try
judges
to
for.
associate sex charges with him, and assault. Yeah, and like just with Julian Assange, just with Scott Ritter, anybody who crosses the line in terms of the U.S. narrative.
Is the easiest way to discredit them, right? You just accuse them of sex charges. I mean, in any case, we'll see where it
Or
leads.
make them prime ministers.
Uh, in any case, another thing that is also been developing over the past few days is the debacle of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And, we've covered this in the podcast pretty thoroughly. Who's behind it? What has, about 130 Palestinians killed in these distribution centers. In any case, what's most recent is the news about the Boston Consulting Group, this U.S. firm that they helped Israel establish the operations and the mechanisms and all of this of the militarized aid scheme. They pull out of it a few days ago, saying we can no longer be part of this because of this is not a humanitarian work. What is happening, right? This is for displacement. The staff accused. This is the latest, that the staff of BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, accused their leaders of collaborating with a state actor in the midst of a military campaign that has killed tens of thousands, called it morally indefensible. So, and then the leadership apologizes to staffers and say, "Hey, the partners who got us in bed with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation did not disclose the full nature of their work. In other words, they are alleging they were misled." Right, and this is just the latest kind of setback for this truly horrific scheme that is, caused so much death and destruction.
Yeah, but this is the thing. I mean, there is a freezing effect everywhere. I mean, there's some companies that are holding firm. I think Microsoft and others, have ended up just firing staff instead of listening to their employees' complaints about collaboration with the genocidal state. And others can't handle that kind of internal pressure, rightfully. So a lot of this is happening because global public opinion has changed. I mean, this is the thing. There's no chance that Israel will ever return to the pre-October 7th status quo, either internationally or domestically. The Israeli frog is being boiled. I'm sorry to beat that dead horse, but it is literally impossible for Israel to extricate itself from an image of absolute brutality, the most heinous kind of brutality we have ever witnessed in our lifetime. And so much of it visible to the eye, so much of it verifiable, so much of it captured by victims themselves and NGOs and international reporting. You know, it's astounding what the body of evidence that exists out there. And I'm just looking for the cases where anyone who served in the Israeli army, current, past, or present, now basically has to hide.
Yeah, and actually, I would point to our viewers and our listeners to check the interview we did with the director of the Hindra J Foundation. We published it a couple of months ago. Very interesting comments, and in particular, because as you say, Charmin, in terms of perception, there's not a lot that they can do to change it. Right? They lost the narrative. They lost it from day one. They lost it, from the moment the video started coming out of the Hamas fighters in paragliders. The narrative for them was done from that moment, but they're still fighting back, and in particular, against the head of the HRF. He's also being, like targeted by persecution. You're gonna see this, the persecution is gonna increase. We saw what happened with the Red Media channel, but I'm very interested in the situation with the French grandmother, right? Because what is Paris going to do? Especially considering something interesting that also developed over the past couple of
Yeah, I'll tell
days.
you what Paris is going to do. It's going to like cowardly back out of its promise to recognize a Palestinian state at the United Nations
They
in
already
about a week
did.
or
They
so.
already did. They did it over the weekend. The foreign minister Barrot, he said, essentially said, no, we are not actually going to recognize. And then he called on Saudi Arabia to normalize with Israel first, which is, again, something we discussed in the podcast, that this whole UN conference for recognition included the recognition of Israel by nations that haven't done it yet. And now the UK and France both have said they will not be recognizing a Palestinian state. And this whole conference that just about a month ago was being described as a point of no return for the two-state solution, now is just another UN conference on what to do about Gaza.
That's been infiltrated and ambushed and sabotaged. But you know something that I really think for viewers who haven't seen this video, we just have to put it on: the New York City mayoral debate, in which the candidates were asked, if you become mayor, what is the first country you're going to visit? And everyone's like, Israel, Israel, Israel. And then one douchebag says, well, for the fourth time to Israel, and for the fifth time after that to Ukraine, because these are our allies. It's the New York mayoral. It's the New York mayoral debate.
Where would you go first?
First visit, I would visit the Holy Land.
Okay, Mr. Lander, sorry.
Boy, what Trump is doing to Canada, there's a lot of opportunities for us to partner better with them.
Ms. Ramos.
I'd love to meet Claudia Sheinbaum, but I'd probably head to Colombia, to my parents' homeland.
Mr. Myrie.
I am the proud son of two Caribbean immigrants. I represent a robust Caribbean constituency. I'd like to go to the Caribbean as my first visit.
Mr. Cuomo.
Given the hostility and the anti-Semitism that has been shown in New York, I would go to Israel.
Mr. Tilson, where would you go?
Yeah, I'd make my fourth trip to Israel, followed by my fifth trip to Ukraine, two of our greatest allies fighting on the front lines of the global war on terror.
Mr. Mamdani.
I would stay in New York City. My plans are to address New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs and focus on that.
This one guy comes out, Zohran Mamdani.
Would you visit Israel as mayor?
I will be doing, as the mayor, I'll be standing up for Jewish New Yorkers, and I'll be meeting them wherever they are across the 5 boroughs, whether that's in their synagogues and temples or at their homes or at the subway platform, because ultimately we need to focus on delivering on their concerns.
And just yes or no, do you believe in a Jewish state of Israel?
I believe Israel has the right to exist.
Not
as a Jewish state?
Notice.
As a state with equal rights.
He won't
Not
say it has a right to exist as a
And-
Jewish state. Be very
And
clear
his
on
answer
that.
was no, he won't visit Israel.
I said that very
That's what he
clearly.
was
Unlike
trying
you-
to say.
No, unlike
No,
you, I
you
answer,
never-
unlike
you
you, I
never
answer
said
questions
no.
very
Okay.
directly.
All right, I
and
think
I
we're
want to
clear.
be
You
very
answered-
clear. I
you
believe
answered-
every state should be a state of equal rights.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Mamdani. Mr. Blake.
And says, well, I'm not looking to make a trip to anywhere because I'm going to be right here in New York City taking care of New York residents' problems. And immediately he gets attacked by someone who, who says, do you not recognize the state of Israel? And he's like, no, I recognize the state of Israel. And then goes on to say, a state with equal rights. And they're like, what do you mean? Are you saying you don't recognize Israel as a Jewish state? I mean, just listen to this segment.
It's really shameful, it's really shameful, this whole display.
It is, but I mean, we know there's a large number of Jews living in New York City, but maybe something like 6-7 million just in the city, and it's boroughs. But that doesn't mean that all of them support Israel. Certainly, we've seen massive changes in the younger generations, and even diehard Zionists changing their positions since 2023 till today. This is not going to, I can't imagine that Mamdani will do badly in the actual election in New York City, because you're going to have a lot of people who have no issue, like young people who have no other issue except Palestine, because that's what's happened. It's become, it used to be LGBTQP whatever, and then now it's Gaza. So a lot of first-time voters are going to vote in, and they're just going to vote for him on the basis of him not being like a complete simp,
Isn't this
right?
guy like going to get the support of AOC? You know, AOC, Biden, and Kamala are doing everything they can to stop the genocide. Like it's so absurd this whole situation. You know, like even if there's such a big Jewish population in New York, they're voting for the mayor of New York. They're not voting for
I
the mayor
know.
of Tel Aviv.
I think these are the kinds of things that really start to separate MAGA folks from the Israeli firsters. I think there's a war brewing there because Israel firsters want war with Iran. They want, death and destruction. They want all U.S. policy to be guided by through the lens of how it impacts Israel, positively or negatively. I'm not just talking about in foreign policy, but I'm also talking about like loans that get turned into outright grants, into infrastructure bills in Israel, into passing U.S. made technology to Israel. And like there are obscure bills that have nothing to do with U.S. roads works bills where Israel's slapped in as something. There's just so much Israeli style pork built. Oh God, that's no pun intended. Israeli style pork built into U.S. legislation. And this is where MAGA is going to have a fit down the road.
You must have seen the protests that are happening in LA right now, right? About the ICE raids, and that you see all of these, very proud Latinos, very proud Mexican Americans waving the Mexican flag, and all of these U.S. politicians saying, "Oh, if you want to wave another country's flag, you should go back to that country." Well, what about all the U.S. politicians and elected officials who are flying an Israeli flag outside their office? I mean,
or wear Israeli, right? Who's that idiot congressman who wears an IDF uniform to work
who
in
knows?
a U.S. government building?
But they don't see Israel as a foreign country. They see it as the Holy Land, and it's their duty as Christians or as Americans, having the most powerful country in the world, to defend. They have a duty to defend Israel. That's how they are learn it.
I'm so happy
They are convinced of this.
with the idea of Israel becoming the 51st U.S. state. Take these Zionists, enjoy them, bow to them for the rest of eternity. Just keep it out of West Asia.
Another interesting thing about this, I just want to bring up this article that we did a few days ago. It's that since the start of the genocide in the U.S., Israel has sold a record number of bonds, of debt bonds. Fundraising.
$5 billion?
$5 billion. It's a historic high for this, and yeah,
Well,
this is exactly why you have
big
mayoral
investment
candidates being
firms
questioned.
and big retirement funds and things like this. They're forcing them. You have Zios on their board, and they're forcing them to invest in this. It's, all U.S. decisions related to Israel are bad decisions for the United States. It's why I really, really see MAGA becoming eventually quite hostile, at least a great chunk of MAGA becoming super hostile to Tel Aviv. And how that'll play out in policy, I don't know. I mean, it's really, Trump is in turmoil right now. He really is. 3 peace deals that his allies don't want to see, right? And his enemies don't want to see. And
he lost his best friend,
that's,
Charmaine. He lost his best friend.
yeah, but didn't they kind of make up? I
Have
don't
they?
know.
I don't think they have. I mean, how do you go back from being
Yeah, I think they
accused
got
of
really
being in
polite to
the?
each other again.
How do you go back
Didn't they
after
get
being
really
accused of of being in the Epstein list? That's a bit of a.
Yeah, but by the way, that was really funny. Grok, okay, Twitter's AI, Elon Musk's AI basically fact checked Elon Musk and says, while Trump, like countless others, may have been at events or parties or dinners or whatnot that were hosted by Jeffrey Epstein, Grok says there is zero evidence of any wrongdoing by Trump. So,
I mean, to go to an Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell a dinner party, I think the implications are pretty severe in any case.
I don't think that's fair. I by the way, I'm not defending him, at all. But of course people show up to rub shoulders and network in the world of politics and business and entertainment. This is what people do. This is what people do. It's like where you go, where you're going to be around A-listers from every industry. It doesn't mean you molested a young girl.
Well, I mean, you just need to see like the most recent cases, from Bill Cosby to what's his name, Diddy, the rapper,
Oh,
to kind of
yeah,
see
I'm
that this
sure.
is kind of like a prevalent issue, right? It's not just a Epstein dinner
Well, I
party
think
issue.
people who have extreme power and celebrity become can become. We've seen a lot of deviance coming from people who have a lot of money and a lot of power. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I don't doubt that, but it doesn't mean anyone who went to a party. I mean, if I'd been invited to a party there, and even if I knew it was a big fat Zio, I would still go. It'd be very interesting for me. I'm a journalist. Of course I would go.
I wouldn't, but
Really?
no, I would not. Of course not. In any case,
I've gone and interviewed settlers in the West Bank. Okay, I've sat and interviewed Ariel Sharon. I'm sorry, like for me, curiosity, and trying to gauge my own opinions on things always, manages to make me do things that perhaps I shouldn't.
it's as you said, your curiosity drives you. I want us to discuss one last thing. We kind of went on a bit of a tangent, but something that happened in Lebanon, the attacks, right? Last week, Israel uh, bombs the southern suburbs of Beirut. If I'm not mistaken, they dropped over 2 dozen bombs in the middle of the night with little notice, terrorizing the population, sending people running from their homes again. Um this is now, how many times has Israel violated the ceasefire, right? You were talking about the thousands at this point.
It's endless. And they hit a building and then had drones watching the Lebanese army come in and excavate and clean up and dig to see if there were any weapons there. There were no weapons there. There were no weapons there. Israel wants to be involved in every part of the process. And now the Israelis and the U.S. have just said that they're going to nix the extension of the UNIFIL mandate in Lebanon. UNIFIL is the UN interim forces in Lebanon.
So UNIFIL was established in 1978 and it was expanded after the war in Lebanon in 2006. It currently includes more than 13,000 personnel. And it became kind of like a crucial entity during the latest ceasefire in particular, right? After the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and the destruction of the southern suburbs of Beirut, etc., all of the bombing that happened, UNIFIL and the Lebanese army were tasked with removing Hezbollah infrastructure and weaponry from south of the Litani River. The UNIFIL has also come under direct attack multiple times by Israeli troops since the start of the ceasefire, and I believe before as well. What do you think this means? What is the next step now that they're going to get rid of UNIFIL? Does Lebanon have any say in this? And what can we expect?
Hala, from what I read, I didn't see that they want to dismantle the UNIFIL. They want to modify its role. That's from what I read. One of it is that UNIFIL should be like they should enforce their presence in the south. That means that they will be able to use weapons even without the presence of the Lebanese army. And even without calling like their command, if they see a person who possesses a threat to a UNIFIL personnel, they will have the right to shoot it. That's what I read.
No, but let's be honest, UNIFIL was always very useful for the Americans and the Israelis, even though the Israelis hate any UN associate organization. They say they're all anti-Semitic. UN is Hamas. Because there was a presence and they could infiltrate UNIFIL with troops from certain countries like French troops, etc. And of course, in Lebanon, for years, we've seen leaks and information and allegations that UNIFIL was providing direct information, security information to the Israelis. maybe not directly, but via, it goes to UN Security Council members who then pass it on to the Israelis. And so in this case, why does Israel have a need for UNIFIL anymore? Why does America have the need for UNIFIL anymore? They've cleared out the South. They would rather have the Lebanese army and a Western proxy force in there, combing the South, which is absolute violation of Lebanese sovereignty. Any Lebanese president or prime minister who accepts this and accepts the removal of UN troops, okay, for something much, much worse, should be voted out instantly. And of course, the Israelis don't want UNIFIL people in their way because they would potentially call out or obstruct Israel's nefarious activities in southern Lebanon.
Is this a sign of an expanding occupation? Is this a sign that Israel and the U.S. are preparing the way for Israel to do their plan of Greater Israel? We already know that in Syria they can do whatever the hell they want. There's going to be no opposition there. Is the ground being set for Lebanon to be kind of taken in a sense, I guess?
We're actually having someone write an article this week about Tom Barak, the UN envoy for Syria, who, the way I think the article or it's been pitched to us is that he has plans for, he's the one who trashed Sykes-Picot recently in the news, okay? But trashing a British-French plan from 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, is not the same thing as trashing colonialism or imperialist agendas. He, we suspect, is there to drive a U.S. Carving up of the Levant. And I think, he's also been suggested as someone who may take over Morgan Ortegas's role, who's supposedly going to be reassigned as
Because
Trump's envoy
she
to Lebanon.
wanted that role in Syria, right? She's the one that wanted to go to Syria from Lebanon to go to Syria.
They plucked her out of all of this. I guess she was just, too Israel firster and not MAGA enough. But Tom Barak comes on board, and he's probably going to who are the American allies? It's the Kurds and the Israelis. Ultimately, they don't have any Arab allies. They do, but they're more proxies. Well, actually, so are the Israelis and the Kurds. But in this case, you have the Israelis in southern Lebanon. You have the Israelis in southern Syria now. These are things that have not been experienced for decades. And Tom Barak is going to, I think, help break up these countries, not in a Sykes-Picot way, but in a real Trump MAGA way, which is going to set up a whole bunch of other conflicts in this region. And that's fair enough. We're going to have to fight for our future, but I think we're going to drain the hell out of the Americans in blood and treasure before we kick them out of this region. Right now it looks like we're an unholy mess, but actually we've been in unholy messes for decades now. We know how to do it. We know how to live through it. The Americans have to put so many resources and have so many eyes at play in this region to make sure their everything isn't just done, but is upheld. And we're going to drain that. We're going to drain that energy because they don't want that. Let's be honest. They want to do China. They want to do Russia. Let's just drain them. Let's just get them to a place where they never want to touch this region again, because that's what's coming. And I think from there we should segue to what's actually directly happening with the U.S. and this region, which is Gaza talks, right? Gaza ceasefire talks and Iran-U.S. nuclear talks. The Iran-U.S. nuclear talks don't look very good. And Trump just recently repeated Iran doesn't have any right to enrichment, and Iran will never budge from that. The Iranians are now also leaking that the U.S. don't seem remotely interested in removing sanctions. So what's the point of this for Iran?
That's what they said, right? That in the last proposal, there's no actual mention of sanctions removal or economic benefits. It's just like the biggest of terms and promises.
I think Steve Witkoff and co. he's just like a secret Israel firster, and eventually Trump is going to have to can him. But that's not the point. The point is Iran, is a full member of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which was set up as a security organization, has become increasingly economic, and allows for the 10 member countries, including China, Russia, India, Pakistan, 4 Central Asian states, Belarus, and Iran being the only West Asian member, to trade with each other, to do joint military exercises together, to work together in lockstep on terrorism, on extremism, issues like this that counter what the U.S. does, because the U.S. funds and supports and arms Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the region. So the SCO wants to undo that. And they're powerful countries. You can't just stomp in on their grounds. They hold their borders. And I think Iran's involvement then Iran not only is now a BRICS Plus member as of a year ago, but Iran is also just joined the Eurasia Economic Union, which means it's coming to play with Russia, all the former Eastern European countries that are a member of that organization. There are suddenly so many countries. Don't forget, Iran would not have acceded to full membership if the other members were not willing to do business with the heavily sanctioned countries. And after the U.S. sanctioned Russia, nobody cares about sanctions that much anymore. There are many, many countries that are willing to bypass it because Russia's way too important in the energy market
I would
just
say
not
they
do
care
business with
enough
Russia.
that they're looking for alternatives, that they care enough that they're actually discussing
They're looking for
de-dollarization.
alternatives. And all these major multipolar players have been cut out of SWIFT, the Western, U.S.-led, Belgium-based banking messaging system that transacts everything, all the major transactions happening in European and Western currencies around the world, dollar, etc., and that every banking institution basically needs. But now there are other systems coming on board and online in global South currencies because of really when the U.S. went after Iran, it went after a middle tier country that had a lot of resources and had a big middle class market and a population of 80 to 90 million people. So you kind of don't do that. You hit your own interests when you do that. You take away a marketplace for yourself. But when they went after Russia, a much bigger player, that was the end of the whole sanctions leverage, at least in the way the U.S. could rule absolutely with sanctions in the past. Now the sanctions barrier has been broken. And I want to ask the question, so what if there's not a U.S.-Iran nuclear deal? I mean, in my mind, this deal is partly happening because Trump wants some space to stop Netanyahu from attacking Iran, because 3 Persian Gulf Arab nations paid him trillions of dollars, in part not to allow a war with Iran because they don't want destabilization.
Trillions.
Correct. But that was part of the deal. And Trump understood immediately, barely talked in negative terms about Iran when he went to the Gulf, because that's not where the Gulf is now. Now that Iran's, allies like Hezbollah and Hamas, etc., in their minds have been weakened, they're not as concerned about Iran anymore. And since the Beijing brokered Saudi-Iran rapprochement 2-3 years ago, those relations are going well from strength to strength. And we're going to have a feature on that shortly, I think maybe next week, because it's such an interesting space. Like, we don't actually know the details. We know they agreed on something in China, right, Kenny? But we don't know what. So, and if there's any headway. So I think, so what if there's not a U.S.-Iran nuclear deal? Of course, Israel will try to take advantage of that, but so might Iran. Iran has now threatened in the last few weeks, Esteban, more than I've ever heard since 2003, to walk away from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. If Iran walks away from the NPT, there's no punishment. If you're not a member of the NPT, you can't have your nuclear program scrutinized. Plain and simple. Israel is not a member of the NPT. Nobody's allowed to scrutinize their program. What does that mean if Iran walks away from the NPT? The IAEA and Western countries and Israel loses all eyes on Iran's nuclear programs. All those cameras, videotaping monitors in every Iranian nuclear facility, all the testing of particles from time to time by surprise inspections, all of that goes away instantly. You want to try that? That's fine. Maybe Iran will strike a deal with its neighbors under Russian and Chinese BRICS SCO auspices to enrich together and sell each other enriched uranium for their scientific and research and energy purposes.
A couple of things I want to mention. The first one is about the SWIFT. One country that is back in the SWIFT, Syria. They've just been re-added to the SWIFT. So any country that is sanctioned, that is being pushed out of the SWIFT, maybe consider, allowing some former Al Qaeda and ISIS commander to be your president. It seems that opens up all of the pathways to the heart of the West. The second thing, and this is maybe we can wrap up with this, but it's something interesting that has been happening over the past couple of days, is the claims by Iran that they obtained a trove, like a large cache of top secret documents on Israel's nuclear program. And they've been teasing it for the past couple of days. They've been talking about this is the biggest leak in history, essentially, and we're going to be releasing, we're going to be studying. It's such a big cache that we're going to take a long time doing it. Is this a negotiation tactic as well from Iran? Is this a warning? We also know that Iran, over the past few weeks, they bought a very large amount of materials to build as many, according to the Western media, as many as 800 ballistic missiles. So they are obviously, the wheels are turning in Iran as well. Charmaine, have you heard anything about this, the treasure trove of nuclear documents?
Well, I reached out to some Iranian journalists or friends just immediately to say, do you have anything? Have you seen any? Not yet. But the Iranians have said that these thousands of documents are complete documentation. They have said that they are on Israel's not just nuclear program, but military, scientific, and nuclear sectors. And what interests me in particular are sensitive documents that the Iranians claim they now have in their possession that pertain to Israel's relations with Western countries and the United States. For me, one of the frustrating things about WikiLeaks is we didn't see a lot of clear-cut U.S.-Israeli communications that were the flip opposite of what the U.S. and Israel were saying in public. Okay, that was either screened out of the WikiLeaks State Department cache of cables or just didn't exist. Maybe the Americans and Israeli diplomats don't paper this stuff, But I would love to see documents that show us the collusion between Israel and these states on weapons purchases, on how to maneuver the ICC and ICJ hearings, on how to pretend certain weapon systems aren't getting to Israel, how to circumvent things, how to undermine, maybe even explicit recognition that they are supporting Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria and in Gaza and in other theaters. That kind of thing will be journalism gold. And of course, the New York Times and Guardian and other publications won't publish this stuff. So I really hope Iran brings this cash to the public, but I've not seen, Iran's not very good in propaganda, if you ask me. I mean, I don't think Iran has handled anything well propagandistically where it even had an advantage. So I don't know that we'll be seeing documents. I have something to say about this, though. Yes, indeed, Iran could be anticipating the collapse of U.S.-Iran talks and then offering up this intelligence tidbit in order to warn Israel and the United States that they have some gold on them, which means they won't show anything to the public. They're just holding it over the Americans and the Israelis. But to be honest, that makes me suspicious about this tranche, or if we'll ever see it, because if I were the Iranians, I would not be telling anybody that I have this cash. I would be using it for military intelligence security purposes, information that could aid them in either retaliating against any Israeli American strikes or thwarting any Israeli American ambushes, attacks, sabotage efforts, etc. That's why I'm not so certain about this information.
To me, that's very interesting. And maybe, Karim, you can give me your thoughts about this. Why do you think the Iranians are teasing this out? Why are they, instead of maybe just releasing the documents or first going over them, they are like kind of dropping these little pieces of information. What is the long game here? What do you make of it? And what do you think is next for these talks? Because they are supposed to give their response to the unacceptable U.S. proposal, they said either today or tomorrow. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I will never understand them, to be honest, why they did this. I don't know. It's all talks, no actions. While on the other hand, you see Israel, all actions, no talks. And they are still doing the same mistakes as Hezbollah did. They showed us like underground tunnels and missiles, and they didn't use them. They just show them to us. And the same the Hajj did during the first few months of following October 7. They showed us drones and missiles and many stuff, and now nobody knows where the Hashid is. I only trust Ansarullah and this stuff, yani, because 2 years ago they released documents regarding UK intelligence work in Yemen, and they instantly released all the documents. Why Iran did this, we don't know. I think if Iran continue like this, Iran will die with the cards in their hands. The Iranians, if you have full flash, they will not tell anybody. They will tell you, I have something, I have something. They will have hard attack and die without showing you the papers. I hope I hope these papers really include something, and if there's nothing related to Epstein Island or how they control other Western politicians, I don't think anybody will care.
Better than the Arab states who've done absolutely zero, zero, zero.
Yeah, but Sharmila, I mentioned Yemen. They are Arab.
And to be honest, like as a journalist, it's frustrating when the resistance axis for decades, kept their information so closely held. To be honest, you can meet people today in Lebanon who have sat with major Hezbollah commanders, like actual, not like the Western media commanders that are like fake people set up just for these journalists, but actual people who were very closely linked with the organization will just tell me like, oh yeah, I had a discussion with so-and-so and he said this. And I'm like, that is so different than when I first came here in 2009 and 2010. You couldn't figure out anything. Now Hezbollah tells you the amount of missiles they have. They show you the inside of their... I understand there's a certain propaganda element to that that's beneficial in war, but I'm not sure any longer that if any of this has ever helped the Axis, because for sure their enemy knows what they have, right? Generally speaking. And it's better to have them fear that they don't know everything. And then you show them the stuff like that. That never happened. I mean, show them through surprise attacks that they didn't anticipate. I'm not necessarily for, just as a person who spends a lot of time in West Asia, that these things should be revealed. Of course, they have propaganda benefits for their own populations, but I think their populations have been well trained not to expect information and just to hope for great advantages in warfare, Karim, do you think there's going to be an U.S.-Iran deal? I really want to know what you think.
As we said last week, Trump is desperate to have a deal or to clean his image because of what happened, I said, in Elon Musk.
So which of these three deals will he have?
You asked me about Iran.
You think that's the one that will come out of these three?
It's the easiest one.
I also agree. I agree with Karim. Yeah.
Because Iranians are desperate for a deal.
They're clearly not.
Sharmeen, they are desperate for a deal.
I think Trump is way more desperate for a deal than the Iranians.
Iranians are desperate.
On what? Why? Tell me why.
Trump and his foreign minister and his defense minister is literally saying, I will bomb you, Iran, if you don't accept And the Iranians will say, next day they said, that's happened 2 weeks ago, hello, we will meet in Oman. So who is desperate, Sharmeen?
No, that's the way of diplomacy.
No, this is not
hold
a
on,
way
hold on.
of diplomacy,
Wait,
Sharmeen.
what's
Diplomacy
the
ends
Iranians
on-
haven't had sanctions removed in all these years,
Sharmeen,
right?
if I am a country and tell you I will bomb you, this is the end of diplomacy.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
Look what happened with Russia and Ukraine. I don't think you understand. You're too honestly like groomed by this the Western way of doing things that we've all come
I'm
to
groomed
expect.
by reality and facts, Sharmeen.
So the Iranians and the Russians will sit at a negotiating table even as they're bombing each other. Okay, that's not that is statecraft. That statecraft that's existed.
That's a
in
war,
these countries.
Sharmeen.
In war, people sit across the table with each other. That's not my issue. Why you think Iran is desperate? Let me just make a case. When Iran has, for decades now, never had any of these sanctions removed, or when sanctions have been removed, there has been no economic boom because the Western companies actually won't do business with Iran because those are private instructions. So why would Iran, at a time where, unlike 2015 and the nuclear deal then, it has come under the Russian-Chinese umbrella, it has come into BRICS, it's come into the SCO, it's come into the Eurasia Economic Union, and has developed a look east policy. Why is Iran so desperate? Because it has lived without Western business for 4 decades.
They are desperate now because first the population exceeded 90 million. There's more millions of people more to feed.
Yeah, but they're doing business with the East, and now they're doing trade with countries.
There is no money coming from
because
the
nobody
East.
cares about.
Sharmeen, let's be honest. There is no money comes from the East. Let's just to be very honest, very frank, yani. For instance, if France wants to come back to Iran, I went to Iran and I saw most of their cars are Peugeot. They don't are even using Chinese cars. China will not come put $5 or $10 billion in a factory to manufacture cars in Iran. France will. One company, American company, maybe will be willing to put $20 or $30 billion in one project in Iran. China is a power hub. China is a manufacturing hub. You buy from China. China will not come and invest in Iran.
I just want to mention that Iran is being sanctioned in between all of these sessions or meetings between Witkoff and in Oman and etc. And they're in particularly targeting their trade with China, which is what has allowed them to overcome the U.S. sanctions over the past several years. So the agenda of strangulation of the Iranian economy is continuing as these talks continue. So to both of your guys' point, I agree actually with Karim that there is a need from Iran because they are being targeted, like their lifeline is being targeted. So with that being said, what were you going to say, Charmaine?
With that being said, China-Iranian trade has now topped $34 billion. Trade with Central Asia, 4 of these countries that are in the SCO, is only just $1.5 billion, but their goals are to have around that much with each of the 4 SCO Central Asian countries that are now dealing with Iran. Trade with Eurasia Economic Union, which by joining the organization, 90% of tariffs have been removed between Iran and the Eurasian trading partners, is looking to boost trade between Iran and these countries to $12 billion just in the medium term. Iran's trade with Russia is over $5-6 billion, and these are just publicly available data. Don't tell me that Iran is unsuccessfully pursuing an Eastern policy. The fact that these 3 major organizations, BRICS, SCO, and EAEU, have made Iran a full member means they are willing to play around the sanctions game. And that sanctions game was busted. I mean, Iran always learned to maneuver past sanctions. It taught the Russians how to do it. Russian officials flooded to Iran after the Ukraine war to learn how Iran was bypassing sanctions. Now that a major power has been slapped with 15,000 sanctions by Western countries, 15,000, Nobody's playing the sanctions game anymore. Everybody's willing to bypass to a certain degree. That opens Eastern markets and global South markets up to the Iranians a lot. We hear about Iranian drones in Sudan. We hear about Iranian drones in Ukraine. We hear about Iran selling bullets in Africa. We hear about Iran doing agricultural projects in Venezuela. And you guys are like, well, without Western sanctions, Iran can't thrive. Listen, it is like a dam. The Americans are trying to stop Iran from making any money, and they've had fingers in dams, in the dam. But the dam has bust open with Russia sanctions, with the fear that a lot of countries have is that the U.S. will do to them what they did to Russia. There's seismic changes in the global geopolitical situation right now, and Iran is in a way better position today to rebuff nuclear talks, because it saw during a better time, or a time where it was more vulnerable, the U.S. they struck a deal with the U.S. They refused to remove sanctions. Today, 10 years later, Iran has major global partners, is part of 3 major global economic organizations, and is going from strength to strength since it's veered. It's created an alternative economic reality for itself. And we're talking also about doing, currency, money transfers between countries directly in local currencies that just didn't exist in the same way 10 years ago. So no, Iran is not desperate. Trump is desperate for a deal of any kind. And for him, Iran was low-hanging fruit. It's not going to happen with his people talking to the media and saying bullshit stuff all the time, things that Iran will never accept. Iran is in a stronger position right now. By the way, we're going to have Cradle mugs available to you guys really soon.
So you're telling, I want to ask you a yes or no question first. What will United States benefit from a nuclear deal? Do you think this will affect the United States?
No, I think the U.S. wants to do a nuclear deal only. I think Obama wanted to get Israel neutered slightly, because it was always like subsequent U.S. presidents have complained about not being able to go after Russia and China, which is the U.S. military's top target for well over 2 decades now, because they're constantly distracted by Netanyahu's agenda to go after Iran and the Axis. Okay, so a nuclear deal by Obama was a way to diffuse the Iran tension, to take away Israel's ability to utilize Iran to push for war. That is also the case with Trump. I'm not saying they're against Israel. I'm just saying they don't want the headache.
So the simple answer is for the image of the politicians of the United States.
No, I think it's to remove the sting that Israel can put into, or the the wrench Israel can put into all U.S. foreign policy works, by keeping Iran a front and center adversary. By doing a deal, even if it's a shit deal, it means taking that off the table.
Which is for the United States and the American people nothing important.
It's not important for American people know anything. It's important for any U.S. Foreign policy decision maker, because they are constantly strapped in by the Israeli demands. The only thing a nuclear deal with Iran does is remove Israel's ability to use that one item to constantly push for U.S. involvement in West Asia.
Okay, I wanted a simpler answer, but the answer is that it's like...
Is anything simple in West Asia?
Yeah,
No.
it's very simple, Charmaine. The answer, I think, is for the image of the United States and personal benefits for the presidents who did this deal. It doesn't affect anything internally in the United States, and it barely affects the foreign policy of the United States across the world.
The Iranians have also made it since 2015 to now, 10 years. They've also made it so it doesn't affect its economy as it did then. They learned that even when you do a deal with the West, they don't do business with you.
I wanted to prove my point. You're still going. Just type answer.
You don't want me to answer? Yeah.
You answered 3 times the same question. I wanted simple answer to ask you this question now, which is, what do you think a nuclear deal will benefit the Iranians? It will hugely impact all the Iran.
Nothing. Let me explain why. The West will never do business with Iran. We had a nuclear deal, Karim. They never did. Stop. They never did business. It's something that the Iranians have said repeatedly. Even if we have a deal, we have had to plan for alternative economic markets, financial markets, resource markets, because we have zero confidence that we will ever be given entry to Western markets or be able to do business with Western markets. So the Iranians in 10 years have transformed their economy to look east.
There's no money in the East, Charmaine. There's no money in the East. But that's what I'm saying.
What do you mean there's no money in the East? China, there's no money. Russia, there's no
China,
money.
you buy
Indonesia,
from
there's
China.
no money.
China doesn't give you money. Dubai doesn't give you money. They will not invest
What do you
in
mean
Iran.
give you money? No.
Charmaine, the West gives money.
Okay, but I just gave you statistics where they were at zero, they're now 12 billion. Where they were at zero, they're now 34 billion.
Charmaine, how you think?
Okay, I mean,
Look,
I gave
it's
you
so
numbers.
complicated.
I gave you numbers.
Charmaine, you gave me numbers, but it's misleading. You have to see the deficits. If the door is closed from the West, of course, it will increase in the East. And don't forget the population.
It's a strategic policy.
Iran
it's
gained
not just la. It's a Iranian strategic policy that was really launched with Raisi.
There is no money coming from China. That's it. You have to see the deficit, Charmaine.
By the way,
Charmaine, just let me explain this
a Chinese professor.
To our viewers, I don't care about Chinese, even professors, because professors know how to mislead the population more than us. So I just want the viewers to understand. Charmaine, if Lebanon, the trade between Lebanon and China is $10 billion, do you think 5 billion is coming to the Lebanese and 5 billion is going to the Chinese? No, more than 90% of the money is going to China because we are buying the China. There's something called deficits.
Actually, oil and gas is a major Chinese need, so that is not true. But I'll tell you what this Chinese professor we've asked is to write an article, because nobody here writes about this subject. Tell us what's going on in terms of Chinese-Iranian economic activity, because you always hear there's none. So we're going to find out.
For instance, what's happening now in the media is they are saying now that trade between China and Iran was like $1 billion in 2015. Now it's 20. Now let's say it's $10 billion. But when this doesn't mean that Iran is benefiting. It means that Iran is paying more for Chinese than it was paying for the Europeans. Yani, for instance, you will see the imports. You will see that Iran, for instance, in March, 2 months ago, they imported around $700 million of goods from China, while you will see that China imported only $200 million of.
That's all the
of
oil
Iranian,
and gas they buy from Iran? China only buys $200 million worth of gas and oil?
I'm talking about goods. I don't care about oil.
We'll definitely pick up this discussion after the Iranians submit their proposal, and of course after the whatever outcome these talks, reach, which I'm sure is going to be rather sooner than later. But with that, we come to the end of this week's episode. We want to thank you so much for joining us, and to remind you again to please drop a like, to share this video, to subscribe to our channel, to find us on Telegram and on X, and on Rumble as well. And to check out our Patreon, please, where you can become a direct supporter of The Cradle. For The Cradle News Roundup, my name is Esteban Carrillo. I have been joined by Karim Shami and Sharmeen Narwani.